Move your truck or face penalties!
Stick! Move your barricade or face charges!
Move your truck back, now. The clipboard queen said it without even looking at me. Her palm lifted like she was stopping traffic on a highway she thought she owned. An orange barricade sat across the only entrance into Copperhill Estates, angled just enough to feel like a dare. 2 volunteers hovered behind her, shifting nervously as if they already knew this stunt wasn't legal. I'd barely cut the engine before the enforcer in crimson stepped closer, heels stabbing the pavement like she enjoyed the sound of dominance. "You're not cleared for entry," she added, chin raised. "Read the notice." Most people would have argued. Most people would have demanded an explanation. Instead, I just stared at the metal barricade, then at her hand resting on it, confident and careless. The last time someone blocked a road like that, a family didn't make it home alive, and I'd carried that weight longer than anyone here would ever understand. "You sure you want to do this?" I asked softly. She blinked, the first crack in her perfect confidence. She had no idea who she'd stopped, no idea what this road meant, no idea that every inch of the asphalt behind her was still registered as its emergency access infrastructure, and no idea that I'd enforced that regulation myself for years. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, remember this moment and so hit the subscribe button, because what comes next isn't just a fight with an HOA. It's the anatomy of a collapse. "My name's Colt," I said, stepping out of the truck, "and I've driven these hills longer than that barricade's been out of its packaging." Her laugh was clipped, irritated. She thought I was just another resident, another man she could boss around with paperwork and a tone sharp enough to cut. She didn't realize she'd just blocked the one person trained to deal with emergency obstruction, trained because he'd lost someone to one. The officer of rules, Marlene Buckridge, had no idea she'd dragged old Grief right out of the dirt. "I don't care who you are," she snapped. "You park outside until your compliance review is complete." Compliance review. That was her new phrase. She tossed it around all week, trying to reshape the neighborhood into her own little command post. And this barricade, was her first real show of force. The tyrant in heels didn't notice the quiet way people were starting to film from behind their windshields. She didn't notice how her volunteers kept glancing down the street, waiting for someone, anyone, to challenge her. But I noticed, because I'd been trained to, and because my father's welded steel mailbox stood just beyond that barricade, the last piece of him I had left. He built it with hands scarred from decades of service, then mounted it the week he died. She'd tried to make me replace it twice, called it non-standard, called it disruptive to the visual theme, but she didn't understand what that box represented. Legacy, stability, memory, service. Everything she used rules to destroy. "Where are you watching from?" I asked quietly. The question meant for the hidden audience beyond the glass. Because people were watching. They always watched when a bully overplayed her hand. "This road is under active HOA authority," she declared, lifting her clipboard as if it were a badge. "And you're violating—" "No," I cut in. Just one word, but enough. "You're violating something far bigger than you think." The board chair's jaw tightened. Her volunteers stepped back. The wind moved through the cedars behind us, brushing past the barricade like even nature wanted it gone. I walked closer, slow, steady. The way deputies are trained to approach unstable situations. My boots hit the pavement with a rhythm I couldn't shake from memory, because another night, years ago, I'd run toward another blocked road, and I'd been too late. Marlene opened her mouth again, ready to threaten, ready to posture, ready to show off the little empire she thought she'd built. But that's exactly when I saw it. A gap, a weakness, a single detail in her setup that told me she'd just broken county law and had no clue she'd done it. And once I saw it, everything changed. That gap changed everything. A single missing permit tag dangling from the edge of the barricade. Something the officer of rules should have triple-checked if she actually understood county access law. The enforcer in crimson followed my gaze, but she didn't realize what I was seeing. Not yet. She thought I was hesitating, second-guessing, retreating. The clipboard queen always assumed hesitation meant weakness. In her world, she talked, others flinched, and control stayed in her manicure-polished grip. But she didn't know me. She didn't know the training drilled into my bones. She didn't know the memory of a blocked road still lived under my ribs like a bruise that never healed. She didn't know the difference between authority and a performance of it. "What are you staring at?" she demanded, shifting her weight like she expected the pavement to obey her stance. "Just noticing something," I said, calm, quiet. "Something you should have caught before you shut down an emergency route." The tyrant in heels narrowed her eyes. Her volunteers stepped a little farther away, their clipped breaths turning into nervous air. They weren't bad people, they were just scared of her. Scared of the board chair who ruled with paperwork and posture, the one who punished disagreement with fines and threats disguised as policy clarifications. Cars lined up behind me now, the line stretching down Copperhill Road. Headlights flickered impatiently. Residents leaned out of windows. Voices rose. The tension wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the entire street. "You need to return to your vehicle," she insisted. "You're delaying an official HOA action." "Official?" I asked, tilting my head. You sure you want to use that word? Her jaw worked side to side, a barely contained irritation. I'd seen the same twitch on people who thought rules were weapons instead of responsibilities. People who'd never set foot in courtrooms or emergency briefings but loved pretending they understood enforcement. You're out of line, she snapped. And you're out of jurisdiction, I murmured. Her posture stiffened, shoulders pulling tight, chin lifting higher. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Just for a breath, just for a flicker. But uncertainty was all a man like me needed to confirm a suspicion. Behind her, a man in a blue sedan leaned out and shouted for someone to move the barricade. Another woman asked why medication deliveries were being stopped. A voice from farther back yelled that her son needed to get to a dental appointment. Fear was creeping into frustration, and frustration into anger. People don't stay passive when they feel cornered. This road is HOA, she started. No, I said again, steady as bedrock. It isn't. The clipboard queen blinked twice. I stepped closer, just enough that she had to tilt her head upward to keep looking me in the eye. Emergency access roads can't be obstructed, I continued. Not for maintenance, not for reviews, not for power trips. Her face flushed instantly, the red climbing as fast as her temper. You don't get to accuse me of power trips, she hissed. You don't even know what we're dealing with. We have non-compliant structures, rogue landscaping, unauthorized decor, violations stacking up every day. There it was, her justification, her empire, all built on phrases designed to scare neighbors into submission. You block this road again, I said quietly, and you won't like who shows up next. She scoffed. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. For a moment, we just stared at each other, her breathing fast and shallow, mine slow and controlled. She glanced back at the barricade, at her volunteers, at the gathering crowd. She didn't understand why tension was turning against her so quickly. She didn't see that she'd just crossed a line the HOA had no business touching. What she did notice, though, was the shifting eyes of her own people. They weren't standing close anymore. They weren't defending her anymore. They were stepping away, glancing at the gap in the barricade just like I had, wondering what, exactly, they'd signed up to support. Move your vehicle or face immediate penalties, she said finally, clinging to the last weapon she understood. Penalties don't scare me, I replied. Lives being put at risk does. The crowd murmured, the enforcer in crimson, swallowed, and for the first time since I arrived, Marlene Buckridge actually looked nervous, because she could feel it. Her control was slipping, and she didn't know how to stop the slide. The moment her volunteers stepped back, the shift became impossible for her to hide. The board chair tried to mask it with a hard blink, but the unease sat on her shoulders like a weight she hadn't trained for. The crowd behind me kept growing, frustration folding into whispers, whispers folding into questions, and questions hardening into suspicion. People were finally noticing what I'd seen the moment I pulled in. This wasn't leadership. It was performance cracking under pressure. And that's when I spotted him. Andrew Keller stood near the far edge of the gathering, half hidden behind a silver SUV, fingers tightening around a folder he didn't seem ready to show and didn't dare put down. The conflicted witness looked like he'd spent all morning swallowing words he wasn't allowed to say. His shoulders hunched slightly, eyes darting between me and the clipboard queen, then down to the ground. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, chewing on the inside of his cheek. Every part of him was a silent broadcast of fear. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of her. The enforcer in crimson noticed where my attention drifted and snapped her gaze toward him, like she'd sensed betrayal before it ever materialized. Andrew straightened instantly, spine rigid, arms pinned to his sides like he'd been caught doing something wrong. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile people give when they're trying not to get hit by something they can't name out loud. Everything okay over there, Andrew? The tyrant in heels called out, voice dipped in warning. He flinched at the sound of his name. A small, quick movement, barely noticeable to most people. But I wasn't most people. I'd seen that reaction in interrogation rooms, on witness stands, in homes where people lived under someone else's shadow. It was the kind of fear that grows roots. Yes, all good, he answered too quickly, gripping the folder tighter, knuckles whitening. His eyes flicked to mine again, full of something he was trying to hide but couldn't. Regret, guilt, and maybe a plea for help. But he didn't step forward, not yet. The clipboard queen marched toward him, heels clicking in short, angry beats. If you have something to contribute, she said, you can contribute it to me first. The officer of rules wasn't asking. She was claiming ownership. Ownership of his voice, his role, his access to truth. Andrew swallowed hard, throat bobbing. He held the folder slightly behind him now, like he feared she'd snatch it out of his hands. I was just observing, he managed. Observing. The man was crumbling under pressure, and she knew it. That's why she leaned in close enough that he took a step back. He avoided her eyes, lips pressed together, shoulders caving inward as if he were trying to disappear. The tyrant in heels turned back to me with a practiced smirk, pretending the moment meant nothing. But I saw the crack. Andrew wasn't just nervous. He was sitting on information she didn't want released. And she was terrified he'd break. A horn blared behind us, sharp and irritated. A woman shouted that she needed to pick up her grandson. Another voice demanded to know why the HOA was acting like a checkpoint. Tension was rising too fast for her to keep buried, and with every second of crowd pressure, Andrew's mask slipped more. He hovered closer now, inch by inch, like someone pulled forward by his conscience against his will. When our eyes met again, he exhaled shakily, opening his mouth just a fraction, as if he finally intended to speak. The clipboard queen snapped her fingers. "Andrew, stay where you are." He froze again, palms sweating, breathing shallow. She didn't even look at him this time. She just issued the command like someone issuing orders to a badly trained dog. And that was the moment I knew I had him pegged correctly. The conflicted witness wasn't siding with her. He was surviving her. He shifted closer anyway, barely 6 inches, but enough to defy her. Enough for sweat to gather at his temples. Enough for me to see the war happening behind his eyes. Duty versus fear, truth versus punishment. Finally, in a whisper so thin I almost missed it, he said, "She wasn't supposed to do this." His breath trembled. His fingers shook. His voice cracked on the last word. The board chair spun around instantly, eyes narrowing, suspicion sharpening into fury. "And what exactly," she hissed, "did you just say?" Andrew didn't answer. He couldn't, but he'd said enough for the first fracture in her empire to finally show itself. The air thinned when the board chair turned on him. Andrew's breath hitched, and the folder he'd been clutching slipped a few inches under his arm before he caught it again, with shaking fingers. The enforcer in crimson stepped toward him slowly, each heel strike sharp enough to cut the silence. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. Intimidation was a language the clipboard queen spoke fluently. "Repeat what you said," she demanded, chin lifting in that familiar, punishing tilt she used whenever a resident stepped out of line. Andrew's eyes darted to me, then to the crowd, then back to her. A muscle jumped below his left eye. Sweat beaded along his hairline. His throat worked like he was trying to swallow something too big to go down. "I shouldn't have said anything," he whispered. That crack of fear was enough to embolden her. The tyrant in heels repositioned herself between us, guarding him like a secret she wasn't ready to lose. She planted her clipboard against her chest, exhaling sharply as if Andrew's moment of honesty had personally insulted her authority. "You're not authorized to speak on enforcement decisions," she snapped. "Stay out of this." The officer of rules spoke with the smugness of someone who'd never been truly challenged, but the crowd behind me had lost patience. A man shouted about missing a meeting. Someone else complained that their groceries were thawing in the trunk. Another voice broke through, angrier than the rest. "Why are you blocking our own street?" That one hit her. Her shoulders tensed, spine stiffening like a wire pulled too tight. She wasn't used to losing the room. "This is a temporary compliance review checkpoint," the board chair said loudly, projecting her voice over the rising agitation. "We won't move the blockade until all pending violations are addressed." That was a lie. I knew it. Andrew knew it. And judging by the way people muttered under their breath, more neighbors were starting to suspect it too. "You don't have that authority," I said. The clipboard queen tossed her hair, forcing a smirk. "Colt, no one asked for your interpretation of the rules. You're a resident here. Nothing more." She said it loudly for the crowd to hear, as if stripping me down to a simple homeowner would knock the wind out of me. She didn't realize I'd spent half my life dealing with people who thought arrogance was a shield. "Move back behind the line," she added, "or I'll fine you for obstructing an active review." Someone laughed bitterly behind me. Someone else cursed under their breath. The atmosphere was shifting, no longer annoyance, but something deeper, something brewing, something edging closer to revolt. I stepped forward just enough to make her flinch. "Where's your emergency access clearance?" I asked. She blinked rapidly. "My what?" "There's no fire marshal permit on that barricade." I pointed to the gap I'd noticed earlier. "You're blocking an emergency route with no authorization. That alone is a county-level infraction." Murmurs spread through the line of cars. A teenager poked his head out of a passenger window and whispered something to his mom. A woman took out her phone and started recording again. The enforcer in crimson's composure cracked. She looked at the barricade, then back at me, then at Andrew, who shrank under her glare like a man bracing for impact. "Did you file the permit?" she asked him sharply. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I wasn't told to," he stammered. Her eyes widened, not with surprise, but with fury, and it was directed entirely at him. "You're telling me you didn't—" "No, Marlene," he blurted, louder than he intended. His hands trembled so visibly that even the crowd noticed. "You never gave me anything to file. You didn't even bring it up in the meeting." The crowd fell silent. The clipboard queen inhaled sharply, the sound brittle as glass. She shot him a look that could have blistered paint. "You're mistaken," she said through clenched teeth. He shook his head slowly, fear warping into something else. Resentment, maybe. Or the beginnings of courage. "I'm not." The tyrant in heels took a step toward him, but the movement was off. Too fast, too panicked, too reactive. She wasn't controlling the situation anymore. She was trying to salvage it, and everyone could see it. Cracks were spreading through her authority like fractures in glass, but she was too busy glaring at Andrew to notice the crowd's changing faces, or the phones now filming her every word. "Enough," she snapped. Everyone stay in your vehicles. Andrew, come with me, now. But no one moved, not even him. Because the moment she grabbed his arm, something in him finally broke, and something in her finally showed its true face. The moment her hand clamped around his arm, the crowd gasped. It wasn't loud, just a sharp intake of collective breath that cut through the tension like a blade. The officer of rules froze, realizing too late she'd crossed a line no HOA handbook could protect her from. Andrew jerked slightly, not enough to break free, but enough for everyone to see the tremble in his shoulders. His eyes darted toward me again, wide, pleading, desperate. "Let him go," I said quietly. The enforcer in crimson didn't, her jaw flexed, nostrils flaring, nails digging harder into Andrew's sleeve as if clinging to the last thread of her authority. "This is internal HOA business," she managed, voice sharp enough to snap. "Step back, Colt." The clipboard queen's voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with something uglier, panic struggling to wear the mask of authority. "You grabbed him," I said, "in front of witnesses." Her grip loosened, barely, but not enough. Andrew swallowed hard, sweat sliding down his temple. The folder he'd been holding slipped from his hands and fell open on the pavement, papers scattering like startled birds. Not documents of secret wrongdoing, no basement files, no hidden evidence. Just routine notices, budget printouts, meeting reminders. Nothing damning, but that didn't matter. What mattered was everyone watching her lose control. A man from the second car got out. "Hey, he doesn't look okay," he said. "Maybe ease up." Marlene Buckridge snapped toward him, eyes blazing. "Get back in your vehicle." That was a mistake, a big one. Because the crowd didn't like being yelled at. Not after being blocked in the heat, not after wading through excuses, not after watching her manhandle the only HOA official who looked even remotely human today. "He can't breathe," someone muttered. "Let him go," another echoed. Andrew's knees dipped slightly. The tyrant in heels yanked him upright again, gripping harder, trying to maintain control even as it crumbled underneath her. She wasn't seeing the danger of what she was doing. She wasn't seeing the residents. Shifting expressions. She wasn't seeing how cameras were now pointed fully at her. Not at me, not at Andrew, but at her. Control wasn't slipping anymore. It was hemorrhaging. "Marlene," Andrew whispered, voice thin. "Please." That whisper undid her more than any shout could have. Her hand twitched. Her breathing turned shallow. And suddenly, the clipboard queen realized just how trapped she was by her own actions. "You're escalating this," I said, stepping forward. "Release him." Her eyes shot to mine. Anger, fear, calculation, all in one flash. "You don't give me orders." I gave a slow nod. "You're right. I don't." Then I let the next line fall with measured weight. "But the county does." Something shifted behind her eyes. The beginning of recognition. The beginning of dread. Not full understanding. Not yet. But enough to make her hand loosen, as if it suddenly burned her. Andrew collapsed back a step, rubbing his arm, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. His gaze landed on the scattered papers on the ground, but he didn't reach for them. He couldn't. His hands were shaking too much. "Are you okay?" I asked him. He nodded quickly, even though he wasn't. The board chair straightened her blazer with jerky movements, trying to rebuild her mask. "Everyone back inside your cars. Now." No one moved, not because of defiance, because of disbelief. Because everyone had just witnessed an HOA official grab her own treasure like a misbehaving child. Because the enforcer in crimson had finally shown exactly how far she'd go to maintain her illusion of power. And because I saw something she didn't. The fire lane sign, faded half hidden behind a trimmed hedge, but unmistakable. This blockage wasn't just improper, it was illegal. And not HOA illegal, county illegal. She wanted a fight, a show of strength, a display of dominance. But she didn't know she'd just made a mistake. No policy, no bylaw, no fine could cover. I stepped around the barricade and pointed at the sign. "You see that, Marlene?" She followed my gaze, eyes narrowing. "That doesn't concern you," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "It concerns everyone," I replied. "You didn't just inconvenience residents. You obstructed a designated emergency access lane." A hush washed over the street. That discovery, professional, irrefutable, hung in the air like a dropped gavel. The clipboard queen's face drained of color. Andrew whispered, barely audible, "We're in serious violation." And for the first time, she knew she'd gone too far, and that the consequences wouldn't be handed out by the HOA, but by the county itself. The clipboard queen didn't speak at first. Shock held her still, jaw tight, fingers flexing around the edges of her clipboard like she wished it were a shield instead of stationary. The fire lane sign glared back at her from the hedge, faded but official, marked years before she ever stepped foot in Copper Hill Estates. A warning she should have known, a requirement she should have checked, a responsibility she had completely ignored. Behind me, another resident got out of her SUV, closing the door quietly but firmly. "Is she allowed to block that?" she asked, voice trembling with anger. "My husband had a heart attack 3 years ago. Paramedics use this road." Her words hit harder than mine ever could. The enforcer in crimson blinked in rapid succession, chest rising as panic pushed through her attempted composure. She stepped backward, almost stumbling on the uneven edge of the asphalt before catching herself. This is temporary, she insisted, but the conviction was gone. A routine compliance operation. But no one believed her anymore, because the truth was standing right there, printed on that sign, rusted and sun-bleached, but still binding under county law. This isn't routine, I said quietly. This is obstruction. The officer of rules clutched her clipboard to her chest, knuckles whitening. You're twisting this. No, I replied. You twisted it the moment you turned this road into your personal checkpoint. More residents stepped out of their vehicles now, slowly, cautiously, but with the kind of shared intent that made her flinch. Anger wasn't boiling anymore. It was simmering, controlled, directed, and squarely pointed at her. Andrew stood a few feet behind her, arms still trembling, the red mark on his sleeve where she'd grabbed him visible even from where I stood. His breathing hadn't steadied, his eyes hadn't lifted, but something in his posture had changed, less cowering, more weighing, thinking, connecting dots she hoped he'd ignore forever. Marlene, he murmured. She spun toward him again, tone sharp enough to cut. Not another word. That bite in her voice pushed him back into silence, but not obedience. His lips parted slightly as if fighting the instinct to tell the truth anyway. His hands hovered at his sides, not quite fists, not quite relaxed, caught between fear and responsibility. The conflicted witness was cracking, and she knew it. Everyone listen to me, the board chair tried again, louder. We're conducting a neighborhood-wide review. You'll all thank us later when standards improve and property values rise. A few residents scoffed. One muttered something about values dropping from her behavior alone. Phones remained pointed at her like spotlights. The tyrant in heels was losing control faster than she could rebuild the facade. You put people in danger today, I told her. Not hypothetically, not maybe. You physically blocked emergency access. I didn't know about the sign, she yelled. That's the problem, a woman behind me snapped. You never do. Murmurs grew louder, angrier, more emboldened. The enforcer in crimson shifted her stance, taking a defensive step back, eyes flicking between every face watching her. Her authority wasn't slipping anymore. It was evaporating. You all need to calm down, she attempted, tone wobbling. This is still a lawful checkpoint. I shook my head. You keep using that word like you understand what it means. She stiffened as if slapped. I took one deliberate step toward the barricade. This won't stand. Not today. Not on an emergency route. And definitely not under your attempt to rewrite the rules. She opened her mouth, ready to argue, but her voice failed her, because she knew. She finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. The county wouldn't overlook this. The fire marshal wouldn't ignore it. And if this got reported, and it would, she'd be answering to far more than irritated neighbors. The clipboard queen clutched her binder harder. You can't just... I already did, I said, calm, controlled, final. She blinked fast, throat bobbing. Her hand hovered near her phone, unsure whether to call someone for backup or hide the evidence. The officer of rules was unraveling with every passing second, and the crowd saw it. Then, from behind her, Andrew finally spoke again. Marlene, please, he whispered. We're not supposed to do this. We're way outside our authority. She whipped around. You stay out of this. But he didn't step back, and she felt it. The shift, the loss, the sudden absence of fear in him. I saw it too, because the moment a witness stops fearing the tyrant stops being one. And that's when I knew I had everything I needed. Not the victory, not the proof, but the leverage. Real, undeniable leverage. And she had handed it to me with her own two hands. Andrew didn't step back this time. That alone changed the air. His shoulders were still tight, his breath shaky. But he wasn't shrinking anymore. The conflicted witness stood there, caught between fear and truth. And for the first time since I arrived, fear wasn't winning. The tyrant in heels noticed. Her eyes narrowed, jaw stiffening as if she sensed her grip loosening, not just on the situation, but on him. Andrew, she said, voice low, controlled, dangerous. Don't do this. His lips parted, the sound barely escaping. I have to. The clipboard queen snapped toward me, as if I'd somehow triggered him. You're manipulating him, she hissed. You're twisting his words, his role, everything. I shook my head slowly. No, you did that all on your own. Her nostrils flared, but she didn't interrupt again. Not when Andrew lifted the fallen folder from the pavement, not when he steadied the trembling in his hands, not when he looked at the crowd instead of her for the first time. The enforcer in crimson tried to position herself between us, but Andrew moved before she could block him. You all deserve to know the truth, he said, voice small but finally, audible. Silence fell over the street. Even the birds in the cedars seemed to pause. The board chair stiffened like a wire pulled too tight. Andrew, stop. But he didn't. He looked straight at her, pain and guilt woven together in his expression. We didn't vote on this blockade, he said. There was no board approval, no emergency notice, no permit request. His eyes flicked toward the fire lane sign before returning to her. And Marlene, you knew that. She froze. The officer of rules couldn't mask her reaction, the twitch at the corner of her mouth, the micro flinch, the sudden inability to meet his gaze. Her control was slipping again, but this time it wasn't because of me. It was because of him. "You're confused," she tried, voice cracking halfway. "You're misremembering." "I'm not." His voice broke, but not from weakness, just from the weight of what he'd carried for too long. "You told me to send the violation notices anyway. You said residents didn't need to know until everything was in place. You said the roadblock would send a message." Residents murmured. Some gasped. One person whispered, "She said what?" Another shut off their car engine, stepping closer. The clipboard queen looked trapped, eyes wide and searching for an exit that didn't exist. The walls she'd built out of authority and intimidation were closing in, because every face watching her now wasn't scared. They were angry. "Andrew," she choked, "think about what you're doing. Think about your position, your reputation, your—" "I am thinking about it," he said, for the first time. The tyrant in heels took a step toward him. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the expectations, the standards this community needs. This community needs honesty," he cut in, "not control." The enforcer in crimson recoiled as if the words had struck her physically. I stepped forward just enough that she noticed, but didn't feel cornered. "He's doing the right thing," I said quietly. "Let him speak." She stared at me, seeing something she hadn't seen before, someone who wasn't backing down, wasn't afraid, wasn't falling for her posture. But worse for her, she sensed something else. The crowd wasn't on her side, not anymore. Andrew inhaled slowly, gathering the courage that had been beaten down by months of her pressure. "There's more," he said, voice trembling again. She bypassed the policy review, ignored member emails, shut down the last open meeting early, and she sent a private note to the towing contractor days ago. Gasps rippled through the residents. Someone cursed under their breath. Another person clutched their steering wheel and shook their head in disbelief. The clipboard queen snapped. "That's confidential! It was reckless!" he shouted suddenly, louder than anyone expected. His hands finally steadied. "You planned to tow residents' vehicles without warning, on a road you weren't even allowed to control." She took a stumbling step back. The officer of rules, Marlene Buckridge, had gone pale. "You betrayed the board," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "I'm finally standing up to you." His voice cracked, his chest trembled, but his eyes were steady, clear, and that was the moment everything tipped, because a conflicted witness had finally become an active one, because he'd handed me exactly what I needed: confirmation, credibility, and a truth spoken in front of an entire crowd, and because even she knew there was no pulling the leash tight again. Not this time, not after this. The clipboard queen looked like she'd been struck. Her mouth opened, then closed again, the words tangled somewhere between denial and panic. The enforcer in crimson scanned the crowd as if searching for someone, anyone, to jump to her defense. But no one stepped forward. Every resident stood frozen, absorbing Andrew's confession like a slow-building storm. "You don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed, voice cracking at the edges. "None of this is official. None of this is admissible. You're blowing everything out of proportion." But the board chair's argument had lost its teeth. Even she heard it. Even she felt it. Because Andrew wasn't stammering anymore. He wasn't shrinking. He wasn't shaking. He stood there with a weight lifted off him, shoulders no longer caving inward. His voice, when he spoke again, was steadier than anything she'd said today. "I kept quiet to keep my position," he said. "But you crossed the line. We all know it." The officer of rules bristled, tightening her grip on the clipboard like she could hold her power in place by force alone. "You're making a mistake, all of you." She gestured wildly toward the crowd. "You think he knows anything? He barely understands the bylaws. He's new, confused, emotional." "He's honest," a woman called out. "He's scared of you," another added. "And he has no reason to lie," someone muttered from behind me. The tyrant in heels spun toward me with a look meant to intimidate. "This is your doing. You're riling everyone up. You're creating chaos." "No," I said calmly. "Your blockade created chaos. Your decisions created fear. And now your treasurer is finally telling the truth." Her nostrils flared. "You can't prove anything." I didn't smile. I didn't have to. Because proof wasn't something I needed to search for in garages or basements. Proof was standing right in front of her, spoken publicly, witnessed by a whole street, recorded on half a dozen phones. And even she knew it. But I had more. Not documents, not files, expertise. Sheriff training isn't just about enforcement. It's about recognizing risk, understanding liability, and knowing when a situation has crossed into legally dangerous territory. Every detail she'd overlooked was a flashing warning sign I'd been trained to identify. "You think this ends with angry neighbors?" I asked. "You think this ends with fines or complaints?" "No. You blocked an emergency lane with no authorization. You issued notices without a vote. You contracted towing services without proper review. And you grabbed a board member in front of witnesses." Her throat bobbed. "That's not—" "It is," I said, stepping closer, voice steady but low. "And if you had even the slightest idea how county safety oversight works, you'd know every single one of those actions triggers outside involvement." Her feigned confidence faltered. "You're bluffing?" she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm preparing." And that shifted the entire atmosphere. Because for the first time since this showdown began, the residents sensed something new. Not confrontation, not escalation. Strategy. My strategy. Everyone, I said, raising my voice just enough. Stay calm. Stay where you are. Nobody approach the barricade. The enforcer in crimson frowned. Why? Because it stays exactly where you left it, I answered. And untouched evidence speaks louder than anything I could say. The clipboard queen stiffened. The meaning landed. The fear followed. You wouldn't dare involve... I won't, I said. But they will. I gestured toward the crowd. People were holding phones high, capturing every detail. Some residents were already whispering about county regulations. A man muttered to his wife about calling his brother-in-law at the fire department. Someone else murmured something about code enforcement. The tyrant in heels felt the shift. It hit her like a cold wind. I wasn't gathering documents. I was gathering residents. I was gathering statements. I was gathering witnesses. And I was gathering momentum. Real, legal momentum. Andrew stepped beside me, close enough she could see whose side he stood on now. His breath trembled, but his posture didn't. I'm done covering for you, he said, her face drained. You can't stand against me, she tried. He shook his head. I'm not standing against you. I'm standing with them. A low ripple spread through the crowd, hope mixed with anger. And that's when I made my move. Not loud, not dramatic, just decisive. I'll be contacting the county safety office, I said, and the fire marshal, and the public access compliance division. Her clipboard slipped in her hands. 3 departments, 3 jurisdictions, 3 points of oversight she'd violated today without even realizing it. And she knew, finally, fully, that her game wasn't just falling apart. It was collapsing in on her. The clipboard queen stood rigid, her fingers tightening around the edge of her board, as if she could squeeze authority back into herself. But the residents were no longer silent. Their murmurs had weight now. Anger, worry, disbelief. You could feel the tide turning against her, heavy and irreversible. The enforcer in crimson swallowed hard, eyes scanning the crowd like she was trying to assess the damage she'd caused. It was already too big to control. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Everyone stay exactly where you are. No one touches the barricade. The tyrant in heels blinked at me, startled. Why? What are you planning? Preservation, I answered, of evidence. That word hit her like a slap. Evidence. She stiffened, lips parting slightly, and for a moment the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Not fear of me, fear of accountability, fear of county agencies stepping in, fear of losing the throne she'd built from intimidation. You can't report this, she snapped. You don't have grounds. I have more than grounds, I replied. I have witnesses, recordings, a blocked emergency access lane, and a public admission from your own treasurer. Andrew flinched slightly, but he didn't step away. He stood beside me now, hands clasped, posture braced, as if preparing himself for whatever storm she aimed his way. The officer of rules shot him a glare so sharp it could have drawn blood. You betrayed your position, she hissed. You're finished. Andrew's swallow was shaky, but his voice wasn't. Maybe, but at least I'm not hiding anymore. The residents murmured, several nodding in agreement. A man stepped out of his truck and crossed his arms. A woman leaned against her car, eyes locked on Marlene like she'd been waiting for this moment for months. I walked slowly toward the barricade, keeping my hands visible and movements deliberate. My sheriff instincts had kicked into full gear. Document, observe, preserve, secure. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was preparation, methodical, strategic preparation. I crouched near the base of the metal barrier and pointed to the lack of a permit tag. This alone is a violation. The clipboard queen's breath hitched. I told you! I wasn't informed! I stood and turned toward the crowd. Anyone here hear anything about a permit, an inspection, an emergency order? Dozens of heads shook. Voices rose in a unified wave. No. Never? She made this up. She didn't tell anyone. She's been hiding decisions for months. The tyrant in heels backed up a step, then another. She lifted her clipboard and hugged it to her chest like a defensive shield. These accusations are baseless, she insisted, but her voice thinned with every syllable. I documented the barricade with my phone, front, back, sides, the surrounding area, the fire lane sign. I spoke into the mic quietly, narrating details with the same precision I used on official reports. Not loud, not dramatic, just factual, calm, and devastating. Every resident recording me knew exactly why I was doing it, and she knew it too. Stop filming him, she demanded. This isn't authorized. He's interfering with HOA business. I raised my head. No, I'm documenting a safety hazard. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her panic was beginning to overtake her authority. I turned to Andrew. Anything else the board should know about? Anything she's tried to hide? He hesitated, but not from fear, from shame. Then he nodded. Yes, he said softly. There's more. The enforcer in crimson shook her head frantically. Andrew, stop! She pushed through a private motion to restrict road access, he continued. No vote, no minutes. She just declared it done. Gasps broke across the street. She can't do that. That's illegal. She's completely out of control. The residents surged closer, not dangerously, not aggressively, but with the force of truth finally surfacing. The The tyrant in heels backed away until her shoulder hit the barricade she'd installed. Her eyes flicked from face to face, searching for loyalty and finding none. I watched her closely. Her breathing had turned shallow. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. Her empire, built on fear, secrecy, and intimidation, was collapsing piece by piece, confession by confession, witness by witness. I stepped forward again, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "This isn't an HOA issue anymore," I said. "This is a county investigation waiting to happen, and you brought it on yourself." Her breath shuddered. "You haven't won," she whispered. "I don't need to win," I replied. "The truth already did." Andrew's voice rose again, broken, brave, final. "She threatened to fine me if I spoke up," he said. "She told me residents didn't deserve transparency." The residents erupted. Phones lifted higher, anger sharpened, and that was it. The moment she realized this was no longer her community to control, because the preparations were done, the evidence was secured, the witness had come forward, the crowd had turned. All that remained was the final confrontation. And she wasn't ready. Not for what would come next. The moment the clipboard queen realized the crowd had fully turned, she clutched her board so tightly her knuckles went white. The enforcer in crimson looked from face to face, searching desperately for even one expression of support. None existed. The street had transformed into something she couldn't command. A gathering, a witness pool, a slow-forming tribunal. And every person here understood one thing. Things had moved far beyond HOA boundaries now. I stood in front of the barricade, phone still in hand, letting the recording run. "Everyone stay where you are," I said again, steady but firm. "This needs to remain untouched until outside authorities arrive." The tyrant in heels flinched like I'd struck her. "Authorities?" She stepped forward, voice cracking. "You're calling them here? Now?" "I'm notifying them," I corrected. "There's a difference." Her chest rose in a sharp inhale. "You can't. You don't have that right." "I have more than the right," I answered. "I have a responsibility." The officer of rules felt that word, responsibility, like a blow. It was the one thing she'd abandoned entirely, the one thing she'd tried to mimic through rules and fines and intimidation. But responsibility is action, not performance, and she had performed her way right into a county-level violation. The residents moved closer, a semicircle of raw frustration. People held phones out with quiet, unwavering conviction. A few kids peeked from windows of parked cars. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. "You're blowing this out of proportion," Marlene Buckridge snapped. She jabbed a finger toward the crowd. "This is temporary. It's within my authority." "No," a man shouted. "It never was." She admitted it wasn't voted on. "She's been lying. You grabbed your own treasurer." Voices stacked on top of each other. The clipboard queen's right eye twitched as if she couldn't decide where to aim her next threat. "You need to calm down," she said, though her trembling voice made it sound like an order she wished she could give herself. "Everyone go back inside your cars. This will be resolved internally." "That's over," I said. "Internal ended the moment you blocked a fire lane." Her throat bobbed. She knew it. She just didn't know how to undo it. Andrew stepped beside me again, not just standing near, but aligning fully with the residents. His breathing was steadier now, his fear replaced by something else. Relief. Once truth begins to spill, it becomes easier each time. "I'm done," he said quietly, but loud enough for her to hear. "I'm done covering for you." The enforcer in crimson rounded on him. "You're destroying everything we built." "You built it," he said. "We just got dragged into it." Her eyes widened, panic taking full form. I'd seen that look before. In interrogation rooms, during traffic stops gone wrong, in moments when someone's illusion of control shatters against consequences they never believed would apply to them. "You think you can call the county and they'll just take your side?" she snapped. "You think they'll care about a minor blockade? They won't." "They'll care," I said. "Because this is an emergency route. Because residents were denied access. Because medical emergencies could have been delayed. Because you involved a towing company without proper authorization. Because you mishandled your own treasurer. Because you bypassed your board." Her eyes flickered, fear mixing with fury. "You can't do this to me," the board chair whispered. "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied. "You did it to yourself." I dialed the number. The crowd went silent. Even she stopped breathing for a moment. I put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. Not to humiliate her, but to ensure full transparency. "County Public Safety," a voice answered. "What's your emergency?" "It's not an active emergency," I said, "but I need to report a critical access obstruction at Copper Hill Estates. HOA placed barricades on a designated fire lane. No permits, no emergency clearance. Residents detained from entering their own street." The clipboard queen staggered a step, as if the words physically pushed her. "Sending fire marshal and code enforcement," the dispatcher said. "ETA 8 minutes. "Thank you," I replied. 8 minutes. 8 minutes until the storm arrived. 8 minutes until her empire faced something she couldn't bully, couldn't fine, couldn't rewrite with paperwork. 8 minutes until truth walked through a barricaded road she thought she controlled. The moment I ended the call, the residents didn't cheer. They didn't gloat. They simply breathed, a long collective exhale of vindication. But Marlene Buckridge, her face drained completely. Her clipboard slipped from her hands. Her illusion shattered on the pavement beside it. and all she could do was whisper, voice shaking, "You ruined everything." "No," I told her. "I'm just getting started." 8 minutes felt both distant and immediate, like a fuse burning towards something explosive. The residents sensed it too. The energy on the street shifted from tension to anticipation. A quiet storm preparing to break open. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was accountability on its way, and every pair of eyes stayed locked on the barricade. And on the clipboard, Queen who had placed it there, the enforcer in crimson paced in a tight circle, fingers twitching like she was trying to assemble the fragments of her authority back into something formidable. But every step, every twitch, every frantic breath only exposed how much she'd lost. The board chair tried to stand tall, tried to smooth her blazer, tried to look like the situation was still hers to control, but her hands shook so hard she missed the button twice. "We are not doing this in the middle of a street," she snapped suddenly. "Everyone move. We're handling this in the clubhouse." "No one's moving," a resident said flatly. "You lost that privilege," another added. The tyrant in heels' jaw clenched, chin wobbling with barely restrained panic. "The clubhouse is the proper venue for board concerns." "It's the proper venue for board concerns," I echoed, stepping closer, "but not for county violations, and certainly not for a public confrontation." She frowned sharply. "What confrontation?" "The one that's happening right now," I said. A ripple moved through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. The atmosphere thickened with a kind of electric charge, everyone ready to witness the moment she'd been trying desperately to avoid. The officer of rules spun toward me, desperate. "You're staging this! You're turning the neighborhood against me!" "No," I said. "You did that when you thought no one would challenge you." Andrew stepped forward, voice steadier than ever. "This isn't a setup, Marlene. It's consequences." Her eyes widened at his defiance, as if betrayal hurt her more than impending authority intervention. She shook her head quickly, wild, forgetting the power she once wielded, with nothing but a clipboard and a sharp tone. "You were supposed to support me," she whispered harshly. "We were trying to fix this place." "No," he said. "You were trying to control it." Her breath stuttered. And that was when the first siren cut through the air. It wasn't loud at first, just a distant wail echoing over the hills. But it made every resident stand straighter. Kids peered out of windows. Neighbors stepped out of their vehicles. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. The clipboard queen swayed slightly, color draining from her face. She pressed a hand to her stomach, the way people do when their world drops from underneath them. "Oh my God," she breathed. "They're actually coming." She looked at me like I had summoned an apocalypse. "You called the county fire marshal," she whispered. For this?" "No," I said. "I called them for the road you illegally blocked, for the people you endangered, for the authority you misused." The wail grew louder. 2 vehicles crested the hill, a fire marshal SUV in the lead and a county code enforcement truck right behind it. Both slowed at the sight of the barricade. Both turned on directional lights. Both stopped directly in front of the blockade she'd installed, and every resident watched it unfold. The fire marshal stepped out first, scanning the scene, eyes moving from me to the barricade, to the crowd, and finally to the enforcer in crimson. "Who's responsible for this placement?" he asked. The clipboard queen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat worked. Her eyes darted to the barricade, then to me, then to the crowd, then back to him. She looked small, like a child caught doing something she'd rehearsed justifications for, but never consequences. I authorized the installation," she finally managed. Code enforcement arrived beside him. "Did you obtain emergency access clearance?" Her silence answered for her. The fire marshal turned toward me. "You the reporting party?" "Yes, sir." He nodded, then addressed the crowd. "This lane must remain unobstructed at all times. Blocking it is a direct violation of County Safety Code 14.3a. Whoever placed this is liable for immediate penalties and further review." The board chair's knees buckled. She caught herself on the barricade she once commanded. "I didn't know," she pleaded. "I was trying to enforce standards." "You endangered residents," the fire marshal said. "That's not enforcement. That's negligence." Phones recorded everything, every trembling breath, every shattered defense, every second of her downfall. "This barricade comes down now," he ordered, "and we'll be meeting in the clubhouse in 15 minutes for an official public violation review. A real public meeting. Not her version, not her rules. Real oversight, real accountability." The clipboard queen let out a sound, half gasp, half plea, but no one comforted her. Her reign was over. Now came judgment. Residents followed the fire marshal and code enforcement toward the clubhouse like a procession, quiet but charged with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. The clipboard queen trailed behind them, steps uneven, eyes unfocused, clutching her blazer as if gripping it tight might hold her crumbling authority together. The enforcer in crimson had lost her color. She looked pale, shaken, stripped of every ounce of certainty she once wielded like a weapon. The clubhouse doors opened, and for once the space felt larger than her presence. She no longer owned the room. The crowd filled every corner, standing, leaning against walls, filling chairs, phones ready. Even the lighting seemed harsher now, exposing every twitch of her jaw, every quiver in her hands. I took a seat near the front. Andrew sat beside me, shoulders tense but resolute. The conflicted witness now transformed into something steadier, someone no longer hiding. You could still see hints of nerves in the little fidgets of his hands, but the shame was gone, the fear replaced by purpose. The board chair stood near the podium like she'd forgotten how to do anything but lead from it. But tonight, she wasn't leading. She was waiting. The fire marshal cleared his throat and began. We're here to conduct an emergency review of a significant safety violation committed earlier today within Copper Hill Estates. Marlene Buckridge's breath stuttered. The title alone hit her harder than any confrontation outside. Safety violation. Because it wasn't an HOA term, it was a county one, and she knew county language carried consequences she couldn't rewrite. Code enforcement stepped forward next. The barricade placed across the fire lane was done with no permit, no inspection, and no authorization. This constitutes a direct breach of county access law. Residents murmured. The room shook with disbelief and vindication. The clipboard queen opened her mouth. I was trying to... We're not discussing intentions, the marshal said. We're reviewing actions. Her lips trembled shut. Andrew shifted beside me. I leaned closer, whispering, You did the right thing. He exhaled shakily. I should have done it earlier. Before I could answer, the officer of rules attempted another defense. This neighborhood has been deteriorating. I was trying to protect property values, maintain standards, enforce order. That's not enforcement, the fire marshal said. That's overreach. The tyrant in heels flinched visibly. She had spent months, maybe years, building herself into an immovable force. But right now, her power looked like a paper shield dissolving under rain. A woman in the second row stood up. My husband could have died if paramedics were blocked, another resident added. She's been abusing authority for months. We tried to speak up. She shut us down. A man near the wall spoke next. She fined me 3 times for grass height, but ignored all emails about safety issues. More voices rose, layered, emotional, raw. The room became a ledger of every injustice she'd dismissed with a smirk and clipboard tap. Marlene's eyes darted to me. Are you satisfied? No, I said, but I'm relieved the county's here. You ruined my reputation, she whispered. You ruined it yourself, I corrected. I just refuse to let you hide it anymore. Code enforcement addressed her directly. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all HOA leadership responsibilities pending formal review. Gasps erupted. She reached for the podium to steady herself. You can't suspend me. This is my community. It's not, someone shouted. It's ours. The fire marshal stepped closer. Your actions endangered lives. This isn't about control. This is about safety. Her final thread snapped. She sank into the chair behind her, staring at the floor, not defiant, not outraged, just defeated. The residents didn't cheer, they didn't gloat, they simply breathed again. A long, collective exhale. Andrew ran a shaky hand through his hair. I never thought she'd actually face consequences. I rested a hand on his shoulder. Truth always catches up. Sometimes it just needs a push. After the official suspension was logged, the barricade was declared illegal, the towing contract voided, and the road returned to full emergency access status. A county inspector approached me afterward. Thank you for reporting this, he said. You may have prevented something serious. I wasn't the only one, I said, nodding toward Andrew and the residents behind him. As people filed out, several paused to thank me. Not for being sheriff, not for making a call, for standing up when no one else could. When I reached the parking lot, the late sun hit my father's welded mailbox across the street. Still standing, still solid, still representing everything this place should have been built on. Integrity, protection, community. And tonight, at least for a moment, it felt like we'd gotten all 3 back. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. That's not enforcement, the fire marshal said. That's overreach. The tyrant in heels flinched visibly. She had spent months, maybe years, building herself into an immovable force. But right now, her power looked like a paper shield dissolving under rain. A woman in the second row stood up. My husband could have died if paramedics were blocked, another resident added. She's been abusing authority for months. We tried to speak up. She shut us down. A man near the wall spoke next. She fined me 3 times for grass height, but ignored all emails about safety issues. More voices rose, layered, emotional, raw. The room became a ledger of every injustice she'd dismissed with a smirk and clipboard tap. Marlene's eyes darted to me. Are you satisfied? No, I said, but I'm relieved the county's here. You ruined my reputation, she whispered. You ruined it yourself, I corrected. I just refuse to let you hide it anymore. Code enforcement addressed her directly. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all HOA leadership responsibilities pending formal review. Gasps erupted. She reached for the podium to steady herself. You can't suspend me. This is my community. It's not, someone shouted. It's ours. The fire marshal stepped closer. Your actions endangered lives. This isn't about control. This is about safety. Her final thread snapped. She sank into the chair behind her, staring at the floor, not defiant, not outraged, just defeated. The residents didn't cheer, they didn't gloat, they simply breathed again. A long, collective exhale. Andrew ran a shaky hand through his hair. I never thought she'd actually face consequences. I rested a hand on his shoulder. Truth always catches up. Sometimes it just needs a push. After the official suspension was logged, the barricade was declared illegal, the towing contract voided, and the road returned to full emergency access status. A county inspector approached me afterward. "Thank you for reporting this," he said. "You may have prevented something serious." "I wasn't the only one," I said, nodding toward Andrew and the residents behind him. As people filed out, several paused to thank me. Not for being sheriff, not for making a call, for standing up when no one else could. When I reached the parking lot, the late sun hit my father's welded mailbox across the street. Still standing, still solid, still representing everything this place should have been built on. Integrity, protection, community. And tonight, at least for a moment, it felt like we'd gotten all three back. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.